podcast cat this week.
Her name is Molly. She's a demon.
Yep, she is an evil little creature, and she is here because I am recording from my mum's house, because my Wi-Fi has been off for 2 months, which has given me a lot of time to pick holes in Pride and Prejudice.
I'm so excited for nitpicking Pride and Prejudice. I was going to say the movie, but what I meant was like, you have to put the parentheses in the right place. It's nitpicking Pride and Prejudice, a dramatic presentation.
Yeah.
We are not actually focused on the movie, we are focused on the text.
No,
From
I don't actually...
Jane Austen's own pen.
Yes, I don't actually have any movie-specific gripes, though I did look up some gripes that were from people who had seen the movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But we are focused on picking holes in the original text, because it's funnier.
Yes. Sorry, I just realised I haven't got the lists open and I'm going to need them later.
You are going to need some lists.
Yes. So, do you want to introduce us to Pride and Prejudice?
I've just remembered we should introduce ourselves first.
We should do that.
Hello, dear listener, of whom there is at least one. This is Analysis Roulette, the show that is extremely serious and doing real literary analysis. I am Duck, pronouns he, they.
1 sec, I'm letting the cat out.
That's Molly, pronouns she, it.
And I'm Dia, pronouns they, them.
All right.
Welcome to Analysis Roulette, a podcast where we take things way too seriously.
Correct. That is our modus operandi.
And this week, what we are taking way too seriously is the complaints that one kid in your GCSE English class had about Pride and Prejudice. Because there's always one.
There is. And it wasn't always me.
It was usually the person who hated being there and, in my case, had signed up for English Literature A-level by mistake and wanted to do English language and didn't realise until it was too far into the year to change.
I have sympathy, but also shut up.
That was your mistake, Joe. Why is
Welcome to Analysis Roulette, the podcast
problem?
where we drag students from our A-level classes for their poor choices.
I don't care if it's been a decade, Joe. You know what you did.
So, Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
Gonna start this episode with possibly the greatest controversy, like the most questionable thing I could say here. Quite good.
Yeah, it's an alright
It's a good
story.
book.
It rattles along.
Right, it rattles. There's plenty that happens in it. It's well written, like the prose style, very good, very funny in a lot of places. You can see why it's lasted as one of the classics of English literature.
Yeah, it's very much a trope codifier of a novel, which I like.
Yes, yeah.
I love a birthplace of genre.
Right. We all know what orcs are because of Lord of the Rings, and we all know what a Regency marriage is because of Pride and Prejudice. And Jane Austen's other works, I suppose. But
yeah, but this is the best known one.
This is really the central tentpole of the thing.
So my personal, maybe cancelable opinion is I actually think that Emma is more Pride and Prejudice coded than Pride and Prejudice.
Ooh, controversial. I have read it. It very much does have a romance novel heroine.
It does.
In a way that, you're right, Pride and Prejudice doesn't really. Pride and Prejudice is an ensemble affair.
It is. And we'll get to that later.
Oh, good. I'm really looking forward to this. This was Dia's analysis, so I have just reread it. And now I am coming here to delight in all of the ways in which it's wrong.
Yes. I did reread it. I rewatched the 1995 miniseries, which is actually not my favourite. My favourite is the 2005 movie because it's so pretty. But I do think it's the best, like, as an adaptation.
Yeah. I have never seen the 2005 movie. I have seen...
You were clearly not a teenage lesbian in 2005.
Correct.
Some of us would watch anything with Keira Knightley in it.
Right. I liked Pirates of the Caribbean for other actors.
The sad thing is, given what's happened since, I think we don't really want to address as a society that every single person in Pirates of the Caribbean was at the hottest they've ever been.
Right.
Like, there is not a single actor in Pirates of the Caribbean who was hotter in another movie.
Are we including the one with the squid face?
Yes.
I mean, you're not wrong. I'm just making sure that we're on the same page.
Positively, every one of them.
Right.
Peaked in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right. And it was good fun. But no, I wasn't primarily watching it for Keira Knightley. Look, 2005 was a rough time. Let's not dwell on 2005. New Who came out of it though, which was pretty good.
Yeah. And Supernatural. And YouTube. Real mixed
So
bag
on the
of year.
whole, 2005 bad for humanity. Setting these things against each other. But no, I've not seen the 2005 version. The 1995 miniseries is, in much the same way as, in my brain, the most canonical and realist version of The Lord of the Rings and also The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy are the BBC radio versions.
Yeah.
The 95 miniseries is sort of the most real version of Pride and Prejudice. I think it's... I think I saw it before I'd read the book. It seems likely. Certainly, I'd rewatched it several times. I have also read the book, but my strongest memories of sort of learning this story are the 95 series.
Mm.
That is what Mr. Darcy looks like. And also the rest of them. Like, those are the faces they have when I read the book.
I'm pretty sure I saw the 2005 movie first because I saw it when it premiered on TV, which I would have been about 9 or 10 probably.
Yeah.
Because it takes a while for things to make it onto network TV here in the
It does.
UK, and did so even more back in the 2000s when you had to wait for Channel 4 or someone to get the rights instead of Sky.
Nowadays you'll sometimes get it within like a year, which is wild.
Yeah, I'm still baffled by that. I recently watched, this isn't like relevant to Pride and Prejudice, but I recently watched Top Gun Maverick, which don't recommend, terrible film. Nothing else on and I was bored.
Legit.
But they mentioned it was the network premiere of the film, and I did actually stop in my tracks to Google when the fuck that came out. How long did it take you to think this was worth airing?
I think we can probably attribute a lot of this to streaming services.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're trying to compete with Netflix and Netflix is going to get it on air as soon as legally possible, you have to
and also you've got
shell out
the
for newer
sort of
things.
the world where it's going to be simultaneously on Disney Plus or HBO Max or whatever it calls itself these days.
And I wonder if that's both incentivize the terrestrial channels to sort of shell out to get things sooner, but also incentivize the filmmaking companies to license it for terrestrial broadcast sooner, because it's not cutting into DVD sales in the same way.
Because DVD sales don't exist.
They don't exist anymore. Everyone's getting it off the streaming services anyway. You might as well license it to television.
And also, I don't own a TV. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I have noticed when I'm like in a hotel room or at my parents' or something, every time I check, they are cycling films a lot more than they used to. I think they're buying them in more like distinctive 6-month chunks or whatever.
Yeah. Personally, every time I end up in a hotel room, I watch like cheaply made true crime television.
Oh, I do love
it's
a bit
so
of
bad.
It's
the only time I ever watch it, and I think that's probably the right dosage.
I quite like it when you end up on Dave and they're showing like political satire from 2003.
Oh yes, yes,
You're
we're
just like,
dragging Tony Blair, the Prime Minister.
just like, yeah, sure, tell me all about the Minister Without a Shadow. That was a real banger of a joke when you came up with it in 2001. I was 4. My political analysis skills were subpar.
I think you're telling yourself short. I suspect that you were a particularly politically savvy 4-year-old.
I do actually remember, just because it was a point of pride for me personally, when Tony Blair came into office, my year 2, I think it would have been, teacher asked us first thing in the morning if any of us could name the Prime Minister, and I was the only one who could, and I was smug about that for the rest of the year. Sometimes I realise there is a reason I had no friends in primary school. But yes, I'm pretty sure I watched the 2005 film first because I watched it with my nana, who loves Pride and Prejudice. She was very anti-Keira Knightley's casting. A lot of people were, including the casting director. Apparently Keira Knightley was considered much too pretty to play Elizabeth, which they solved by casting Rosamund Pike as Jane.
Okay.
Which, pretty hard to rank some of the most beautiful women on the planet, but I feel like if you're concerned Keira Knightley is too pretty, that's a unique problem to have.
Right. Few people have had that problem. I mean, I have to say, both those versions, I feel like they made the theory that blondes are prettier do a lot of lifting with regards to making you, like, the informed truth that Lizzie is not as pretty. And like, she is, though. She's just a brunette.
We are, again, put a pin in that one. It's also special to my heart because I've told you this anecdote before. I don't think I've said it on the podcast. When I was about 12, 13, my grandmother had just come out of hospital for like some routine surgery and was on quite a lot of painkillers. And I was at her house while she was recovering, as you do, watching Pirates of the Caribbean or Bend It Like Beckham, some kid-appropriate movie with Keira Knightley in it. And my gran, really well-meaningly, said, I think when you grow up, you're going to look a lot like a less attractive version of her. Because if she hadn't been medicated, she really would have cut out the less attractive version part.
Brain mouth filter not operational.
But it is probably the funniest backhanded compliment I have ever received in my life.
I like it.
When you say someone looks like a celebrity, we all know you mean a less attractive version of.
You don't normally have to say it. Oh, you look like a plain version.
You look like, if Keira Knightley wasn't hot, you look like that. Absolutely savage, Grandma. Thank you. But yes, that was the first version I watched. I did study Pride and Prejudice for GCSE, and I think I watched the 95 miniseries at some point during the course of that.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I did do it for GCSE. I know it was a common text to do. I don't remember that we did it, so we probably didn't.
I had to read it for GCSE, but I wasn't examined on it, and it wasn't on my coursework because my GCSE, I don't know how it works in other countries. In the UK, you all do the same level of exam, but you can do it with different exam boards. So that means you have like a different structure, different things are coursework, different things are compulsory, etc.
Right, there's
the exam
3 or 4 big ones.
Yeah, the exam board my school did had a requirement that you study at least 2 texts which you weren't examined on. Which meant we spent about 3 weeks on them, and mine were, I think, The Merchant of Venice and Pride and Prejudice.
Okay, I don't know. We had at least coursework on everything, but we also did the minimum number of stuff because my class, despite being the upper level class, because of the extremely moderately deprived area that the school was in, despite being the upper streamed class, not everybody was a very fluent reader, so we really struggled with getting through texts in a timely manner.
Yeah, we only spent about 2 weeks on it because we weren't going to be examined on it, and they were being paid to produce good grades, not people who could talk about Pride and Prejudice confidently. But anyway, yes. So obviously we're both fairly familiar with Pride and Prejudice. I'm sure most of our listeners have at least a vague idea of what happens in the story, but do you want to give us a quick plot summary?
With the caveat that I don't have the summary in front of me, and actually quite a lot does happen in Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, we don't need a beat-for-beat replay.
Right. Pride and Prejudice is a story about the 5 daughters of the Bennet family and their travails in the marriage market. They are sort of shabby gentry in that they're not poor. Okay, all levels of wealth here are relative to the standard of people who live in stately homes.
Yeah.
And, if you don't have a lot of... We can tell they're not super rich because the same horses that would be wanted to pull the carriage, they do own a carriage, but sometimes the horses are needed for farm work instead. This makes them shabby versus people who live in thinly reskinned versions of the most famous stately homes in the country. I'm not saying Pemberley is Chatsworth. I'm not saying Pemberley is Chatsworth, but it's not Chatsworth.
It's a bit Chatsworth.
It's a little bit. Yes, you would not be wrong in imagining it as Chatsworth. So these are, if not actually aristocrats, all of them. All of them are people with a lot of money by the standards of normal, real people. Nobody below stairs appears in this book. This is strictly above stairs problem. Yeah. Right, I think someone addresses Cook at some point, but they're not characters. They're not.
No, they are furniture.
Right. So the 5 daughters of the Bennet family are moderately well off within the standards of their class. But they won't be when their father dies because the estate is going to be inherited by Mr. Collins, a distant cousin, because it's been entailed, which is to say there's a sort of persistent clause in a will at some point has been introduced that says this place can never be inherited by a girl.
Indeed, by the child of a girl, to my understanding. So they can't even get one of them married quickly and have a son.
They can't find they can't find a grandson to pass it on to either. It's got to be strictly in the male line. And they don't have any sons. They have 5 adult or nearly adult daughters. At the start of the book, none of them are married. All of them are out in society trying to find husbands. Mrs. Bennet is very silly. Mr. Bennet is ineffectual. some new men appear on the scene, and this kicks off the whole plot. And we have the primary men in this plot are the famous Mr. Darcy, who has a lot of stuff to do besides falling in love with Lizzie, but falls in love with Lizzie, gets rejected, devotes himself to helping Lizzie's sisters with their terrible marriage choices, also starts being nice to Lizzie, and Lizzie comes back around on him and marries Mr. Darcy and goes to live at not Chatsworth.
Bit harsh.
I like Mr. Darcy a lot, but partly because in the book you get some glimpses of his inner world where he's like, oh no, I am in danger of falling in love with this wonderful woman. I must stop that immediately.
The thing with Mr. Darcy is he is genuinely kind of an asshole, but in the manner of being rude, not in the manner of being a bad person.
Right, exactly.
It's not that she is mistaken to think that he is an asshole.
Right. He is actually being very rude to her at several points. This is mitigated somewhat by sometimes he's being rude because he is just too shy to speak to pretty girls.
But he is also genuinely just quite rude.
He is genuinely just quite rude.
In his proposal, he points out how poor and embarrassing her family are.
Right, and he expects her to understand that he is being that this is evidence of the depth of his affection that he's interested anyway, and she's like, you've just insulted me 6 ways to Sunday. No, I'm not marrying you.
And
you're a dick.
He does hear that and go, you know what? I should probably work on myself a little bit.
You may have a point about my manner.
Look, I still think your family is poor and embarrassing, but I shouldn't have said that to you whilst proposing.
Which, to be fair, is also Lizzie's position.
Yeah.
Because she also regards her family as embarrassing and she knows she's poor. Like,
to be fair, the key difference is that he thinks all of her family are embarrassing, and she goes, excuse me, Jane is perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, walk me back. I'm sorry, you think Jane is embarrassing? How very dare you? And he's like,
my mother,
I insulted
yes.
all your sisters. And he's she's like, I don't care.
My smaller sister, my mother, my younger sisters, yes, they are embarrassing, but I love my dad, and you've been nice about Jane.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm an only child, but that sounds very sibling.
Jane is her best friend in all the world, is the thing, as well as being her sister. Jane is the eldest of the Bennet sisters. The social rules do not absolutely mandate that she get married first, but they do push in that direction.
I think my understanding is it's not that she has to, it's that if Lizzie or one of the younger girls got married first, it would be mildly embarrassing for Jane.
Right, it sort of puts her into the old maid bracket a bit.
Yeah.
Because it means that she failed to get married, but it's not that they can't.
If you have a younger sister who's married before you, it's because the person who married that sister looked at you and said no, which is just an embarrassment, especially when you are on a marriage market. People are going to wonder.
And Mr. Collins does look at Jane for like 2 days with a view to marriage, and then switches his attentions to Lizzie.
Yes.
Lizzie turns him down because he's awful. She's correct, he is awful. Many words can be written on whether she is correct to turn him down, but he is awful. However, the reason he moves on from Jane is not that Jane is in any way undesirable, it's just that Jane is, in his eyes, taken.
Yes. By his social
better, which is the wonderful Mr. Bingley.
The Labrador man.
Who is
himself.
Just the handsomest doormat in all the land.
I love him. There has not been a single adaptation of this where I did not fall head over heels in love with Bingley.
He is just a puppy. He is a little puppy dog, and he sees Jane, and she's really pretty, and she's really nice, and he falls in love with her, and then his sisters are like, okay, let's go to London and separate you from Jane, and then because he is a doormat and a puppy dog, he's like, okay, let's go to London and not see Jane anymore.
Also because Darcy tells him that Jane is a, social climbing, scheming witch. Which does add to Lizzie's reasons not to like Darcy.
Right. So we have Darcy, who will eventually... Darcy, whose affections are fixed on Lizzie from the minute he notices them, basically. Yeah. But where there's some back and forth
before he notices.
Right. But there's a lot of back and forth of him persuading himself that it's okay to like Lizzie. We have Mr. Bingley, who likes Jane and knows he likes Jane and doesn't really understand why his family don't like Jane. And eventually they all get out of his way enough for him to marry Jane, and they are very happy together. And we have the wicked Mr. Wickham.
Yes.
Who is also a great character. Because he is wicked in a very, this is a Regency marriage novel way.
Yeah. There are
Mr. Wickham is not a serial killer. He is not even a tax fraud. He is not doing crimes. He's just a cad.
He just sucks. He's a sitcom villain. This is
He
the
is.
period equivalent of a sitcom. He's like he's the guy everyone hates in Friends or The Office or something.
Right.
No one actually thinks he's awful. He just sucks.
He just sucks as a person.
Yeah.
His wicked history is that he, having been a childhood favourite of Mr. Darcy's dad.
For no reason, as far as I can tell.
I think just because he was the son of, like, Mr. Darcy's dad's long-term
Yeah, he
totem.
basically has the exact same backstory as Littlefinger from A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones.
I'll take your word for it, having not consumed this media.
No, genuinely, that's Littlefinger's backstory.
Nice.
And he also fixates on the similar-looking child of the woman he grew up with there. Littlefinger is basically evil fantasy Wickham.
Wickham's primary evil deed is that, for reasons of wanting money and to own Chatsworth at some point, which who can blame him?
I mean, same.
Tried to certainly win the affections of, and I think elope with,
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Darcy's younger sister, who was about 14 at the time.
Yeah, which I think was technically marriageable, but would have been seen as extremely young.
Yes, I think when it was written, it was more of a preying on someone who is young and innocent and new to the world, rather than a child as we would currently think of it.
Yeah, it would be more like somebody in their sort of mid-20s maybe marrying a very wealthy young 19-year-old girl. You would
Right.
still think that was shady, but you wouldn't be calling the police.
Right, exactly. You are meant to look at this and understand it as, oh, you have picked someone who is young and naive, too much so to know any better.
Yeah.
And you are trying to basically love bomb them into marriage because you want their money. Mr. Darcy finds out about this. They have what sounds like a spectacular falling out.
I have to assume it was fairly dramatic because these two were involved.
Right. And these two they are dramatic men.
They are. But opposite types of dramatic men, which makes a good clash.
Wickham does not brood.
Darcy broods like it's a championship.
But following this falling out, Wickham has to, like, get a job. Which is to say he has to go and become a soldier.
Which is the worst thing that happened to a Regent's gentleman.
It is. Like, he has, by his own standards, seriously fallen in the world as a result of this scheme. But he gets into the story because he comes along with the soldiers who have been billeted in the low village. And, mostly just for fun, starts flirting with the Bennet girls. They don't have any money, he's not actually interested in them. His next scheme is mostly to cause trouble, and because he would like some sex. He elopes with Lydia, except they don't actually finish eloping. They just go off to London and get a room together.
This is after he's spent the better part of the story running around flirting with the Bennets and spreading malicious rumours about Darcy.
Yes. Having thoroughly soured everyone in the village on Mr. Darcy and his character, he fails to complete eloping with Lydia and instead just ruins her reputation. At the point where you've run away with a man to London and got a room with him and not married him, you are ruined.
Yeah.
She's never going to get a husband now.
No one cares whether or not you have actually had sex with him.
It is irrelevant. Her reputation is forever destroyed. Except...
I've not noticed this.
Darcy is trying to make up the friendship with Lizzie, who has
after
recently...
the proposal disaster, yes.
After the proposal disaster. And happens to time it on the exact morning that she's got a letter saying, Lydia's run away with Mr. Wickham and we don't think they've got married. So Lizzie, of course, is in a state because her sister has just completely destroyed her own life. She gives Darcy a very short version of this, and Darcy is like, I have to go. And Lizzie is like, well, yes, he's not going to want to know me now. He already thought very little of me, and now this has happened.
It's not disproving your family are poor and embarrassing point.
Right. What he actually does, however, is go to London and essentially drag Mr. Wickham by the scruff of the neck into a church and make him marry Lydia.
He also gets him a slightly better job so that Lydia can be provided for.
Right. And it's a sort of, you could either have this slightly better job and marry Lydia, or I can kill you. These are your choices. Yeah. I am not being a gentleman here. I will gut you in the street.
The funniest thing is that, like, in theory, like, this is one of my nitpicks for later, so maybe I should put a pin in it. Yes. Okay, I'll
put a pin in it for later.
I'll save my nitpicks for later.
Yeah. So Lydia is now unhappily married to Mr. Wickham. Wickham prefers this to being murdered, but is not really thrilled because she's got no money. This was not the plan. His plan has really gone
and also because
backfired on him.
Lydia, I mean, she's only 15, so there's a reason she's unbearable, but she is portrayed as genuinely unbearable.
She is. She is a great character, but
like,
again,
she's annoying in a way that is completely normal and reasonable for a 15-year-old. But
right, she is very well drawn. I personally would not want to marry Lydia Bennet.
I'm sure she'll be fine in like 3 to 8 years. But right now, she is a very annoying teenage girl.
I think her chances of being fine are substantially reduced by being married to Mr. Wickham.
I have to assume they're not going to spend much time together.
I don't think it's destined for happiness.
No.
Meanwhile, Mr. Collins has married one of Lizzie's friends because Lizzie won't have him, and continues
this friend
to
is 27 and therefore a spinster.
Right, she has made the very rational and sensible decision of I'm never going to get another proposal. This man has a reliable living. This is a transaction.
Yes.
And Lizzie is but love, but at least liking. But he sucks. And Charlotte is like, yes, but being a spinster also sucks.
Yes, and also Charlotte doesn't have a extremely pretty and nice and talented older sister who Lizzie expressly says, like, oh, it's fine if I don't get any marriage prospects because
Jane will.
Jane's sister's weird spinster aunt.
Right, she's like, Jane will marry. Someone is going to want to marry Jane. Like,
we
Jane
are
isn't.
Informed. Jane is gorgeous and lovely and vivacious.
Right, and unlike Charlotte, who is 27, Jane is like 22.
Yeah.
She is very much still eligible. It's not that she's not been left on the shelf.
No.
She just has not found the right man yet. She's got a couple of good prospects. Someone is going to want to marry Jane. And Jane, who loves me more than anyone, is never going to throw me out.
She might throw Mary
So my
out.
Backup plan is always just live with Jane.
Yeah.
And Lizzie Charlotte is like, I don't have Jane. I don't have a backup plan. I need to marry someone. Your weird cousin is the best option.
I've never before known as soon as we found the title, but I think your weird cousin is the best option.
The upshot of all of this is that sort of the truth comes out in various directions. So Mr. Bingley finds out that his sisters have been lying to him about Jane being awful and not wanting him anyway, and rushes back to be like, I appear to have been misled. Would you like to marry me after all? And Jane is like, yes. And Lizzie finds out about everything Mr. Darcy has done to basically save, well, particularly Lydia, but also the rest of the family from social ruin. And that he wasn't planning to, like, make a thing about this. He writes her a letter, I think.
He basically writes her a letter saying, you're completely
confessing everything is like, you never have to see me again.
See, it's very much the tone is, you're completely within your rights to not like me for being rude, but I want it to be entirely clear that I am rude but helpful.
Right. I need you to understand everything that actually went down with Mr. Wickham and why I was right to throw him out in the first place. Also, you're welcome for Lydia. Also, keep an eye on Wickham. I just want you to understand that I may be a dick, but I'm not a bad person.
Yes.
and Lizzie, reading this, is like, I may have also been misled as to the badness of your person. And thank you for apologizing. And you are quite handsome. You are very rich. And I do really like your house. So if the offer is, and he's like, the offer is still on the table. This is the last time I will ever mention it. Because if you say no twice, I assume you never want to hear from me again. And she's like, well, what if I have changed my mind, though? I might have changed my mind.
Then, out of absolutely nowhere, with a steel chair, comes his gentry aunt.
Demanding.
Who has been haunting the plot thus far.
Right, who turns out being like, Lizzie, I've heard all these rumours that my nephew is going to marry you. You must promise me that you will never ruin him by marrying him. And she is like, well, now I am going to do it.
Yes. It wasn't even on the table at this point. This is actually before the, sorry, do you still want to get married conversation. This is in the, oh, you're not awful. Good to know. Noted. I'll move on with my life section.
Right. Like, Lady Catherine de Bourgh turns up and is like, my nephew is wildly in love with you and you must promise never to marry him. And Lizzie is like, good tip. I will promise no such thing.
It's just like, okay, I was not aware of that, but I will be making use of that information. Get out of my house.
Thank you for giving me this information. I am changing my plans. I am now planning to marry your nephew.
Yeah. I think there is a reading to be had here that they get married entirely out of spite.
I don't think I agree with that, but I think it is maybe 15% spite.
They do genuinely love each other, but I think I could be convinced that the reason that they got married as and when they did is spite.
Spite was certainly involved.
It was a motivating factor.
Yes. And then everyone has a more or less happy ending. So Jane is well married to a man with money. Lizzie is even better married to a man with even more money. Lydia is unhappily married, but at least not actually socially ruined. The two younger girls have a little bit of grace to finish growing up and find themselves men. The aged parents... Mr. Bennet has the house until he dies. If Mrs. Bennet survives him, she has a choice of daughters to go and be looked after by, and they can pass her around when she becomes unbearable.
Yes.
So it is broadly a happy ending.
It is not the fate of many women.
Yes, it is not an unalloyed happy ending, everything beautiful and perfect forever, but it is a happy ending. The story reaches a good resolution, and our heroes, Jane and especially Lizzie Bennet, have got one over on the world and come out well. With men they even mostly like.
Yeah. It's worth noting Lydia does not appear to ever realise that she is not having a successful whirlwind romance with Wickham.
No.
This is doubly true in all of the filmed adaptations, which all have quite a lot of fun with Lydia.
Yes.
I think because otherwise it's too sad.
It is. It is quite sad.
If you don't make Lydia clearly completely oblivious, cheerfully oblivious to all of the things that suck in her life, it's too sad to watch.
Right. But this means you make her extremely silly and extremely naive.
And to be fair, her mother encourages this entirely.
Yes.
Yes. The 2005 version is the best one for this, in my opinion, because it is just squeeing noises of excitement while everybody else stands around awkwardly.
Right. Mrs. Bennet is just delighted that Lydia's found a man to marry, and everyone else is like, yeah, but they're not married. Mum, they're not married. They've gone off to London. They've been there like 3 weeks. They're not married. He's not going to marry her. This is bad news. And she's like, oh, it's so nice. He's found a man.
Yeah.
No, that's not what's happened. She's very silly. You can see where the kids get it.
You can. But yes, that is Pride and Prejudice. And the reading we are doing is Needless Nitpicking, which is one I've been looking forward to since we started.
Yeah.
Also known as The Cinema Sins.
I hear there is a distinctive ding noise, which we have not got.
Yes. I will try to avoid using the phrase plot hole ding so we don't get sued.
Okay.
But I am hearing it in my head. This is actually, I think I mentioned way back in maybe our Flat Earth episode, that at one point during university, I watched 200 or 300 Nostalgia Critic videos back to back.
You did mention this, yes.
This was for a bit of coursework I did on audience reactions to adaptations, and at the same time I didn't just watch Nostalgia Critic, I also watched quite a lot of Cinema Sins, quite a lot of I Hate Everything, that entire sort of family of reviewers.
Yeah.
And I got very, very familiar with the cadence in which they do them. So, Needless Nitpicking, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. It is picking holes in things for the sake of picking holes in things.
Yeah. It's identifying anything that could... It is drawing an identity between the concept of a plot hole and the concept of something happening that is in any way unexpected.
Yes. And this can take a lot of sort of forms. It can be much more detailed and have more of an overview. It can be simply a list of flaws. Also, what I'm trying to avoid doing, which is something that most of the YouTube ones should do, is I'm not going to be picking holes in things that are intentionally incorrect. So I'm not going to deliberately say, I don't know, Mr. Darcy never apologises for what he said to Lizzie. When he does, it's just, in slightly florid tones. My understanding is that this is done mostly to get people to correct them in the comments and boost their social engagement. So if we start doing that, you'll know that the podcast is going badly.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is try to just bridge it into something that's a bit more engaging to have as a dialogue, because there are two of us.
I concur with your maths.
Which is, I'm going to just rattle through a few things that made me go, things that I found people questioning online. And then things that I think are genuine flaws. So those are my three categories. things that I think are genuinely confusing but are explained within text. Things that seem to have caught people up, maybe not including me, maybe including me, which may be intentional, may not be, may just be quirks of the passage of time, meaning our understanding of things are different. And then there are some things that I genuinely think are flaws in the text because it is not flawless.
Go for it.
Okay. I've already forgotten which of these we put a pin in earlier, but so I'm going through sort of vaguely but not totally chronological order. Number 1. The parents.
Mr. and Mrs. Bennet.
Why the hell are they married to one another? The thing
Many
is,
have asked
narratively makes perfect sense. You got bad examples. He married her because she was pretty. She married him because he was rich. It wasn't enough. They're unhappy. Their kids are screwed. I understand this narratively. But if you even stop for 3 seconds and think about this as a world in which people live, it feels impossible that these people did that. Actually, no. It feels impossible that these people did that and learnt nothing in the 20 years they've had children.
Right. Especially Mr. Bennet, who is sort of more inclined to articulate his opinions than Mrs. Bennet, who thrives on drama. How is he not warning... He does warn Lizzie about making his mistake, but I feel not strenuously enough for the depth of the mistake.
Yeah. So, it's this thing of... Mrs. Bennet he did. Mr. Bennet is encouraging them to not make the exact same mistake he did, but neither of them are actually paying any attention to what their children are doing.
Yes. I mean, he lives in his library and she lives in her head.
Like, they know that when he dies, they're all screwed, and neither of them is making any attempt to fix anything at all, including their own flaws. And this just feels very weird and out of place in a narrative where everybody else is fairly layered, except for Jane, who is perfect.
Jane is a very thin character. It's just that she has one layer, but it's perfection. So
yeah. But
she's
like
just
every
sweet.
other
That's her
character in this, even like minor characters like, Bingley's bitchy sisters and perfectly
who I do
Georgiana,
love. They're so much fun.
The other characters who are a bit one note are sort of one note because Lizzie doesn't care to know about them.
Yes.
Like, Lizzie has no reason to be asking about the inner lives of Bingley's sisters.
Right, but you don't get the impression it's because they don't have them.
Yeah. Whereas Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, you truly get the impression that this is all there is to them.
There is nothing in their heads.
Like, Lizzie dislikes her mother for being kind of embarrassing, and she likes her father despite being aware that he's sort of neglectful.
Right.
But you would expect that she would have some idea of their further personalities, and she genuinely seems to not.
Yeah. Now, you can argue that this is because that's how you see your parents. Parents have a status in your brain that is not equivalent to just a person. They're a parent first, and you have such a long and layered understanding of them as your parent that you don't ever really take a step back and view them as if they were someone you didn't know. So I will buy that Lizzie doesn't think about her parents in the same light as she thinks about other people. But they do seem like there is nothing going on with them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to bring up Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is not a great book. It would be a much better book if it had been written by somebody who liked Pride and Prejudice.
Right.
But in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Mr. Bennet is dead. Like, he is a zombie. He's just in the library, and sometimes they go in and pretend to consult him on things. And this does not change the plot. And if you can be replaced by your own dead corpse, I think your character is thin.
Yeah. This is the thing, is the only really notable things about Mr. Bennet are that he thinks it's a bad idea to marry someone for shallow reasons, because he is married to Mrs. Bennet, and he does not make any attempt to fix anything ever, presumably also because he is married to Mrs. Bennet.
Right. I think being married to Mrs. Bennet does make all practical solutions more difficult because you have to argue with Mrs. Bennet about them. But there are surely things he could do about his 5 daughters that are not just pin all his hopes on Jane.
Yeah.
His entire plan is Jane and Lizzie will marry people who have money, and they will look after the younger girls, and that's it. That's the plan. There is no, I am cultivating more distant relations who might take in the younger girls.
There's no indication that they, I'm not saying they need to have in text like after 5 girls we stopped trying for a boy, but there's no real explanation at any point in the text of why they have 5 daughters and don't seem to be doing anything. It's just taken as written that both of the parents have gone, well, Lizzie and Jane will make decent matches.
Yeah. And he's not trying to, there are ways you could place some of your daughters with other families, with branches of your own family.
You could send anywhere that isn't here, so there aren't 5 of your children competing on the same marriage market next to their extremely irritating mother who every man in town knows.
Right.
He's got relatives he sends his daughters to later.
Right. They go on visits to London because it's close, but also, why have Jane and Lizzie not been sent for a season in Bath?
Yeah. They are doing nothing to help their kids on the marriage market, and while that is the plot, it is also slightly frustrating.
Right, it is the plot. The plot would not happen if they had been doing anything other than hoping some soldiers turn up to marry them. But they could have.
Yes.
They're not very practical people.
Yes.
Mr. Bennet is deeply ineffectual.
He is, and this is the thing, is you see very clearly that Lizzie is kind of his favourite. Like, he acknowledges that Jane is the perfect one, but Lizzie is the one who is the most like him, and she's the one he hangs out with, so you don't really notice how neglectful he is, because we're from the perspective of the daughter he actually makes a quarter of an effort with.
Yeah.
Compared to the 0 effort he makes with the other 4. But he sucks as a dad.
He's not a very good parent.
Like, when Lydia runs off, he's upset and all, but he is kind of like, well, I guess that's a problem.
Right, he doesn't even immediately go and look for her. He just sort of writes to his brother-in-law to be like, could you keep an eye out for Lizzie?
It takes a really long time for letters to get places.
Right. You literally can get there as fast as a letter.
Like, you could carry the letter yourself.
It would be just as fast. It takes the same amount of distance and time. And it's 24 miles to London, and he doesn't go. He does eventually, but yeah.
Actually, they're the only parents we spend much time with, which does leave the novel itself to have sort of a dim view of parents as a social class.
The elder Mr. Darcy appears to have terrible judgment of character.
Yeah, the elder Mr. Darcy appears to have terrible judgment. Nobody else's parents are really around except for what's-her-face, Charlotte's, who she, in my favourite line in the 2005 version, it is in other versions, it's just that's the one that's performed best. She just goes, well, I'm 27 and I'm a burden to my parents, so I guess I'll get married to Collins.
Right.
It's a great moment.
The Lucas parents, like, they're not a lot better than the Bennetses, really.
It makes more sense for them to be a bit desperate because they've got a 27-year-old daughter who needs to get married to survive in society. But yeah, they're not doing anything helpful.
Right, and
the only people who do anything helpful outside of our protagonist generation are the aunt and uncle who are like, well, you seem upset, Lizzie, so you can stay with us.
Right, you seem like you need a holiday. Would you like to come with us? We're doing a little tour of the Lake District because it's pretty. And you really seem like you could use a break.
The bar for the previous generation is on the floor, and they are the only ones passing it.
Yes. This is not a novel that encourages you to trust that your parents have got your interests in mind, or really anything in their minds.
No, they are no thoughts, head empty.
Charlotte's father has been telling the same anecdotal story about how he got knighted for the last 20 years. He has one anecdote.
Yes. This is partially because the country is at war while this is all going on.
Not that you'd know it.
You would not know it. It is actually one of the reasons that you shouldn't trust Wickham, and is one of my minor nitpicks, which can be very easily explained by the fact that these guys are in their late teens, early 20s and don't know anything. But the fact that Wickham is just wandering around Hertfordshire with the militia. Flirting. Despite the fact that he is a commissioned officer and there is a war on, should have been a red flag.
Yes, him being here to flirt with you means he is not doing that job that he has.
Yes, like, I get that the officers are all very dashing and everything, but they're the war on.
Why are they here, being dashing in a village in Hertfordshire?
This is not where the war is. This is Hertfordshire.
Those are really images that don't go together. Our American listeners may not be familiar with Hertfordshire. Please just imagine the picture of the English countryside off the back of a chocolate box.
Yeah.
That's Hertfordshire.
This is a very nice leafy bit of the country where relatively little happens unless you are watching a cosy murder mystery.
Yes.
There are two genres of story that happen in Hertfordshire. They are the marriages and the murders of the landed gentry.
Yes.
That's pretty much it.
No one who doesn't live in a big house has ever been even featured in a story about Hertfordshire.
Yeah. But yes, it is not where the Napoleonic Wars were happening.
It is not, no.
So when we meet this charming, dashing army officer, the fact that he sort of tells Elizabeth in confidence that, oh, all of his prospects have been maliciously slighted by Mr. Darcy, it does feel like Elizabeth, who is supposed to be the clever one, should be going, it doesn't seem like he's the only obstacle to your progress in society. It feels like you not being in a war where you're being paid to fight might be causing some of those problems.
You might be contributing to your own lack of promotions.
Yes. Because one of his chief complaints about Mr. Darcy is that Darcy is spitefully denying him the progression he should be receiving as his due. Which, given that we can see him quite clearly not doing his job, seems a bit like it should have raised some questions.
Yes, the girls in general, and this includes Lizzie and Jane, are not really aware that there's a war on. It does not feature in their thoughts.
No, to be honest, you would not know from reading the book that there was a war on.
You have to learn that through external means of when it is set.
Yes.
Something the adaptations are faithful for. They also do not alert you that there's a war on, although I would enjoy the art house Pride and Prejudice that starts with like a 10-minute silent montage of all the horrors of the Napoleonic Wars and then goes to Hertfordshire and never revisits the war again.
Kind of explain one of my other nitpicks, which is why are the men picking so slim?
Where are all the boys?
Where are the men?
Where are the failed sons of nobility?
Literally, like,
We have so many failed daughters. Where are the sons?
like, this feels like it is set in a universe where 75% of babies are female.
Honestly, I think it contributes to it feeling a little bit more modern than it is, because it feels like it's set after the First World War and all the boys are dead.
Yeah. No, they're not dead yet. They're still off in the war.
Right. They should exist. There should at least be, oh, I'm going to marry so-and-so's son when he comes back.
Like, it's not just that Mr. Darcy and Bingley arriving is, like, new men on the market. It's some men. Any men.
We never hear about the local previously rejected men.
Yeah, like, we're given to assume that Jane and Charlotte and Lizzie they're at varying stages, but they're all out on the marriage market, and all three of them share one prospect at the beginning of the novel, which is Jane and Lizzie's weird cousin.
Right. Okay, I understand that the plot is Mr. and Mrs. Bennet have 5 daughters. Why does everyone else only have daughters?
Yeah. Like, with the context that there's a war on and a lot of men are away fighting the war, it makes a bit more sense. But within the context of the novel, which does not tell you this, it is a weird disproportion of women.
Right. There's no men until the soldiers turn up, and then the militia turns up, and then suddenly there's men in fancy uniforms.
I know.
Now, I understand that fancy uniforms are a draw, but why are there no non-uniformed men for you to compare with?
It does sort of make Lydia's behaviour kind of more understandable if there has been, like, 4 men available for her entire life, and she is the 4th most likely to get married woman in her area.
Right. She's
Like
if she spent her whole life going Jane, Lizzie, Charlotte Lucas, me is the list of people who get married in that order, and there are not enough men for that.
Like, Mr. Collins is the only pre-existing man we spend any time with, and we see quite clearly his first choice is Jane. Jane is unavailable. His second choice is Lizzie. Lizzie says no. His third
He
choice
goes to
is Charlotte. Charlotte marries him. Presumably, had Charlotte rejected him, he would have moved on to Lydia.
It seems likely, because he is bound. Part of what he does sort of structurally in the story is be the person who most clearly follows the rules of how you are supposed to choose a bride.
Yes.
Like, Wickham doesn't do it because he's a cad. Bingley doesn't do it because he just straightforwardly falls in love and stays there, although he falls in love with the eldest and prettiest Saul as well anyway.
But he really should have been marrying someone with better prospects than a Bennet sister. He just happened to fall in love with Jane.
Right, exactly. He didn't actually choose the most eligible woman. That would be Darcy's sister.
Yes.
Or it would be either Darcy's sister or Darcy's cousin.
Yes.
Like the daughter of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which is who his sisters are pushing him towards.
Yes, which Darcy and his sisters all seem to both want and expect him to marry one of those two options. but he is simply bewitched by Jane.
Right. So he's not doing it properly. He's not following the rules. And Darcy
He
with
doesn't
Lizzie.
appear to know that there are rules.
I don't think he knows very much. He does not have... His head is not full.
The thing is, I don't get the impression that Bingley is stupid, precisely. He's
just a bit weather vane.
He's a bit weather vane, and I think also he and Darcy are friends because they're both very socially awkward in opposite directions.
Yes.
Bingley is the agreeable kind of socially awkward, where you don't quite understand what's going on, so you just laugh at all the jokes and join in with all the moving. Whereas Darcy is the kind of socially awkward where you sit in a corner hissing at people if they try to make you dance.
Right, they have a very specific friendship, which is that Bingley drags Darcy out to parties, and Darcy drags Bingley home from them before he can give away all his money.
Yes. I actually love them. It's one of the things I do wish more adaptations spent time with. Like,
honestly, an iconic friendship.
This is one of the things I think 2005 did right, which most of the earlier... I think the 1941 had a bit more Bingley and Darcy, but I've only seen it once and it was more than 10 years ago. But, like, the 2005 one actually shows them talking to each other about their crushes a bit more, and it's just so precious.
That's adorable.
Love them.
It's notable that Collins does, in fact, know the marriage rules and follow the marriage rules, and everyone hates him for it.
Yes, everyone hates him. And they sort of acknowledge that they're a bit unfair to hate him because he's just annoying.
Right, they're like, I don't actually know anything contrary to his character apart from he's clearly very silly and annoying. But it turns out silly and annoying is enough.
Yeah, Mr. Collins honestly probably would have gotten on with Lydia had they married.
I don't know if get along is the word. I think they would have had a Bennett marriage.
Yeah, I think they would have.
He would have been doing being a parish priest and spending most of his time sucking up to Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and she would have been being frivolous and silly, and he would have disapproved of her being frivolous and silly, and she would have disapproved of him being boring, but they would not have annoyed each other enough to actually murder each other.
Yeah.
And 20 years later, Mr. Collins might have grown up enough to go, I may have married poorly.
Yes. Whereas Charlotte, you get the distinct impression that Charlotte has simply gone, I will simply ignore my husband for the rest of my life.
Charlotte has taken a job.
Yeah.
Like, she has taken the job of be this man's wife.
Yeah.
But her reasoning very much is, I need a job. He is hiring. Yeah. I think I can live with the terms of this job. I have accepted.
Yeah.
I respect her for that.
I respect Charlotte. I like Charlotte a lot. I do, however, relate to Lizzie when Charlotte tells her and she's just like,
you did what? Him? Seriously?
You know there are other men. Like, any other man. And Charlotte is like, well, no other man asked.
Right. Well, Lizzie is like, I would rather live in a grotto in the garden. And Charlotte is like, well, I wouldn't.
Yeah. I actually love Charlotte and Lizzie's dialogue. They're so fun.
I like living indoors. I don't want to be destitute.
Yeah.
This is a job I can do. I am not holding out for the lottery.
Yeah. Whereas, again, Lizzie can afford to hold out for the lottery because she has Jane, which brings us to nitpick number 3. Jane is a crayon character.
Jane is not a character. There's no personality in Jane. She's just sweet and nice and perfect.
The thing is, it sort of works because it does show narratively, again, I say many of these are caveated by narratively it makes sense. Narratively, this works because it sort of shows that women are really at the mercy of these weird whims of higher society people and men.
Right, Jane's entire life at one point hinges on whether Mr. Bingley can get his act together to move back down from London without his sister's approval. Her entire life and future is, can this man grow enough of a spine to go and live in the house he himself has rented when his sisters don't like it?
Jane's story is she goes to this party, she's been told there's a new eligible bachelor, their eyes meet across a crowded room and they are instantly in love. They dance together, they talk, they fall head over heels in love with each other.
Yes.
And Jane has been told her whole life she's beautiful, she's personable, she's presumably good at the various things you're supposed to do to run a household in Regency world because no one comments on her being bad at them.
Right.
She's the perfect marriageable woman of her class.
The downside is she has no money and her parents are silly.
She has poor prospects, but everyone has said it's okay because you're gorgeous, you're lovely, you will make a good match.
Yes.
Unfortunately, she falls head over heels in love with someone who is a social better, but not to an unreasonable extent.
Right, they're at the same parties.
Yeah. He's just richer. It's not like Mr. Darcy, whose mother was titled gentry. He's, within her social class, if a little bit higher than her. This should be fine. But it takes, 5 minutes of malicious gossip for Bingley to be dragged by the ear back to London.
Yeah. Really nothing. And her entire possibility of happiness in the emotional sense and of stability in the financial sense rests on that 5 minutes of malicious gossip about her.
Yeah. And she could not have done a single thing to present that. She couldn't have been nicer. She couldn't have been prettier. She couldn't have convinced
She was being
Darcy.
perfect. He was in love with her. It didn't help.
She couldn't have convinced Darcy that her family weren't a problem, because they are. And she couldn't have convinced Bingley's sisters to like her, because she couldn't possibly have been any nicer or more perfect.
Yeah.
There are reasons Jane is drawn in crayon. But
right.
Jane is
her being perfect is what points out that she could do nothing. But being perfect didn't help. Not even it wasn't enough. It just didn't make any difference.
Yeah. Bingley couldn't be any more in love with her.
Right. It's just that him being in love with her doesn't actually matter.
Yeah. Because this is a stupid marriage market. Which is very much the point the book is making, that this situation is stupid.
Right. The book
but
it doesn't explain its premises, but it very much in some ways works like sci-fi. It's partly why it's fun to read from this amount of time distance, is it drops you in media res into a society that is not yours, and does so in order to point out that the rules of that society are not great.
Yeah. Reason that Jane is drawn in crayon, but the fact does remain that every single time we see Jane, she is busy being perfect.
She does nothing but be perfect. She's just sweet and nice. Her hobbies are being sweet and being nice.
There is not a single moment, the meanest Jane ever gets is essentially, waggling her eyebrows at Lizzie when someone does something embarrassing. There's a couple of moments where you get the impression from Lizzie's narration that she and Jane are making, we will be debriefing about this later, eye contact at various social engagements.
Right, but then because Jane is so perfect, she doesn't even laugh about it.
Yeah. The debrief is more Lizzie going, oh my fucking god, did you see what, I don't know, Lydia did earlier?
And Jane is going, of course I saw it, but you shouldn't be mean, darling.
Yeah.
Jane is the better angel of Lizzie's conscience.
Yes. Jane and the parents, again, it's interesting because the younger girls are sort of drawn in crayon, but they're drawn in crayon in ways that are believable for an older sister writing about her annoying younger sisters.
Yes. It's also I have this sister, she is 15, she's the worst.
Yeah, it's you don't actually get the impression that Lydia has no redeeming qualities. You just get the impression that she's 15.
She's 15 and she's been raised by the two silliest people in the world.
Yeah, it's the same thing with, Mary. You see that Mary is described pretty throughout.
I have such sympathy for Mary.
Mary is kind of a know-it-all. She's quite moralising. You understand why her older sisters find her unbearable. But you also understand as a reader that she is not actually irredeemable. She's just annoying.
She is trying so hard, is the thing.
Yeah.
She is trying genuinely to overcome the limitations that she can see in her parents.
Yeah.
She is trying to try hard enough that she can overcome the hand she's been given and play it up into something better. Mary would have accepted Mr. Collins in a shot, and I think they probably would have worked okay together.
Yeah, they would have been fine. They probably would have had a great time. It's interesting because, like I said earlier, I do get the impression that Lydia would have been the third option of the sort of hierarchy of marriageable Bennets, because she's much more vivacious and outgoing. Lydia is the youngest. Mary is the third eldest, followed by Kitty, then Lydia.
Yeah. And Mary knows how bad the hand she's been dealt is.
And I think you get the impression that Mary and Kitty, while they're both sort of quite different, Kitty is very much in Lydia's shadow, whereas Mary is very much doing her own thing.
Yeah.
You do get the impression that they are aware that they have been cast as the sort of third-tier Bennet siblings after...
They know they're the spares. Yeah.
Perfect Jane, Lizzie and Lydia, who are the sort of distinctive ones, and then there's Mary and Kitty.
Right, and a lot of what Mary's annoyingness is her attempts to have a personality.
Yeah.
Like, it is her attempt to have a character and to be a person who can be distinguished from her sisters.
Yeah.
And she's trying specifically to be distinguished as the sensible and clever and moral one.
Yes, and we're told that she's the least attractive and a bit vain, which is
Two
mean,
things that can often go together when you're surrounded by your prettier sisters.
Yeah, it's like
You
you
have
do
to live
really
up to them.
you feel for Mary. Like, this is her older sister's narration, and she's just like, yeah, Mary's the annoying, ugly one who boasts all the time about how good she is at piano.
Right. As
Like,
opposed
ouch.
to, like, Mary is the one who is just trying so hard.
Yeah.
Trying a lot harder than Lizzie.
Lizzie is not trying because, again, Lizzie has a backup plan called Jane. Mary does not want a backup plan called Jane.
I hope that Mary finds a nice parson. And I think she will chill out when she no longer has to try so hard to become marriageable. Her method of becoming marriageable is to be the moral and sensible and clever one. But I think she will chill out on that front when she has done the marrying.
In an early biography of Austen, apparently she claimed that Mary went on to marry a clerk, I think, a legal clerk.
I could see it, yeah.
Which I think that makes sense, yeah.
I could see her with a circle of surprisingly educated friends.
I looked it up, and yeah, the early it's called A Memoir of Jane Austen. I've forgotten the author's name, but it was like it included quite a lot of contemporary notes and things from Austen herself. It gave marriages for Mary and Kitty. Mary marries a legal clerk, and Kitty marries a clergyman who lived near Pemberley.
I could see both of those things.
Yeah, I am sure that Lizzie is not delighted that the person who moves closest to her is Kitty, but, you know, it could be worse.
Right, I mean, it's better than it being Wickham.
Yeah, could be Lydia and Wickham. I do really want a sequel to Pride and Prejudice, which is just about the dinner parties these people host, because you can't not invite your sister to dinner. But your sister's husband did attempt to, like, maliciously marry your husband's sister.
Honestly, the whole experience of dinner parties has to be just trying to invite enough other people that Mr. Darcy does not actually have to make conversation with either Mr. Collins or, crucially, Mr. Wickham.
Yeah, that had to be dinner party, because this is in the Regency era when at dinner parties the ladies would retire to a separate room and leave the men
you alone
to
to talk.
And if the Bennet sisters and their friends get together, the only one of these people we know that he can tolerate is Bingley. Poor Bingley is just being there as, like, Darcy's emotional support buddy.
Smoothing over this entire situation constantly.
Well, Wickham just stands in a corner hoping Darcy doesn't stab him this time.
Brooding and considering stealing the candlesticks.
Because this man has actually threatened his life before.
Right. And every time he turns up, he's like, I am currently being judged on how well I am husbanding this idiot.
Yep, Collins has absolutely no idea that Darcy finds him unbearable.
He is oblivious to everything. And he's just talking about how much he loves Darcy's annoying aunt who he got married to spite.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the ladies are presumably in the parlour each holding a glass up to the wall to eavesdrop.
Right, because they are sisters, and they are fully aware of how ridiculous their husbands are, especially together.
Yeah. I like to imagine that this is, like, you know, Lydia has grown, it's no less frivolous, but slightly less annoying, and finds the entire thing hilarious. Because I imagine that if this situation were to happen to Mr. Bennet, Mrs. Bennet would be laughing until she wet herself.
She would be telling all her friends about how much her husband had hated having so-and-so to dinner every week.
Yeah. Yeah,
and now she made sure to have, 2 courses so they'd have to spend more time together.
Yes. I think the girls probably go out for a preamble about the gardens, just so that the men have to hang out with each other more. And then at the end of the day, they all go home to debrief in the way that married couples do after dinner parties. And every single one of them is writing to their sisters going, you will not believe what Mr. Bingley said Darcy said to Mr. Collins.
Next time we have to make sure there are cards.
Yeah. I really want to see what happened after the novel.
Give us the rest of the soap opera.
I would watch the hell out of a soap opera sequel to Pride and Prejudice. That would be amazing.
I think it is a fitting genre for it.
Again, I say, when I am in charge of all of Hollywood,
Right, this is
After,
so there's gonna be a studio. They're gonna start with Art House Shazam.
yep,
We're gonna remake
Muppet Hamlet.
Barbie with Miss Piggy.
Yep, Muppet Hamlet and Muppet Barbie.
Muppet Hamlet, I'm very excited for.
Yes.
But also Pride and Prejudice soap opera.
Pride and Prejudice soap opera. There's quite a few we've discussed that haven't made it onto the podcast, including Supernatural, but on purpose this time.
Supernatural, but on purpose, is a fascinating project.
But yes, no, on the list is Pride and Prejudice sequel soap opera.
Pride and Prejudice Archer's Edition.
Yes. God, that would be great. It would make a great radio drama.
It really would. It's all dialogue anyway. It's all conversation. You just have to swap out the ambient noise of they're currently walking in a garden versus they're currently talking in a carriage versus they're currently talking in a drawing room.
Exactly. You need like one Foley artist who's had half an hour to work.
Why has the BBC not done this? This is their bread and butter. They have, and we just don't know about it. There's got to be a BBC radio play of this by now.
I think BBC Podcast still takes pitches for fiction. I don't want to write it, I just want them to make it. Do you think that's allowed as a pitch format?
It's more of a prompt.
Can I just email like BBC Radio 4 like Pride and Prejudice sequel ... question mark?
You can email them that. I don't know that they will do anything with it, but I do know that you are capable of emailing them that.
Anyway, so moving on from things that make perfect sense in the narrative but are weird upon reading, which was sort of category 1, to things that trip people up even though they make sense in the narrative, if that makes sense. So number 1 on this list, Wickham. Why is nobody doing anything about this situation?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not saying you should like shoot him in the street for being a bit of a cad, but it does seem like words should have at least slightly gotten around.
Right, everyone seems to be working awfully hard to protect the reputation of this outright cad.
Yeah.
And it's not like everyone is chill with try to seduce and elope with a 14-year-old for her money.
People are not happy about the Georgiana situation. She is the daughter of somebody who brought Wickham into his trust. She is 14, and she is his social superior. She is ticking every single list on the people you should not screw with in Regency England.
Right, and everyone...
She also has a protective older brother who has a knife.
And everyone sort of... In the Netherfield region, the region, the local scene, as it were, if they heard this account from a credible source, would instantly have a problem with Wickham and would stop inviting him to dinner parties and letting him flirt with their daughters. Like, you could, in fact, stop his career of seduction by telling people about his career of seduction.
Is like, we're given to believe that the Bennets, while everyone finds Mr. and Mrs. Bennet a bit embarrassing, the daughters are fairly popular. They've got friends. Jane is universally regarded as the jewel of the local marriage market. Not one person in the know pulls them aside to be like, hey, just FYI,
that Wickham
dude, he's bad news. Like, about half of Lizzie's early perception of Mr. Darcy as a dick is because he's a dick, and the other half is because Wickham is straight up lying about him. Right. This should be easily refuted. They're in the same social circles.
Yes. Why is this not being... Why are you protecting Mr. Wickham?
And this really culminates with the marriage, which is one of the ones that I do think is a sort of weird niggle at me when I'm reading it, which is everything shakes out great for Wickham.
I mean, he doesn't marry someone he wanted to.
But you don't get the impression that was ever in the cards. And let's be honest, he's not going to be a loyal husband.
Well, no, that's absolutely not an option.
He's not particularly shackled to Lydia. He's just married to her. He's got a much better income than he had. Like, yeah, he hasn't gotten away with the millions he was aiming to steal, but he's come away a lot better than if he had simply not eloped with the sister of the girl Darcy has a crush on.
Right, and, he has got a respectable marriage, and not to be sneezed at, he has got a marriage with someone who is beloved. He has managed to marry Mr. Darcy's sister-in-law, and can be reasonably confident that he will therefore not be allowed to gamble himself into destitution because somebody will step in to save Lydia again.
Exactly.
He has actually picked up a safety net along with a wife.
He's picked up a safety net, he's picked up a wife, he's picked up a reason for Darcy not to shoot him in the head.
Right, which previously was an option.
Seemed extremely likely at certain points in his story.
he has not got away with what he wanted to get away with, but that's because what he wanted to do was get away with causing trouble.
Yeah. He comes out probably like one of the best in terms of life situation. The biggest wins of the story is Wickham.
Yeah.
His punishment is that Lydia is annoying.
But as we see with Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, sometimes that could just happen anyway.
Exactly. And, like, look, this isn't, like, a morality play for toddlers. It doesn't matter.
Right, we don't need him to be punished so we understand he's bad.
Yeah, it's just weird that it's not really acknowledged by anyone how everything has come up Wickham by, like, the 2/3 mark of the story.
Yes, no, everyone does treat it as Wickham in the same way. They sort of treat it as if he was in the same situation as Lydia, and he had been narrowly saved from disgrace brought about by his own actions, but that's not equivalent.
It's the same thing as I've seen several people say that, like, Lydia's situation seems horrendously unfair, and it does, but it's not nearly as the bad situation Lydia is in is not nearly as unfair as the good situation Wickham is in.
Right. Right. Like, the worst thing that's happened to him is that he's married to her, which, I mean, she's annoying, but...
It's the Regency era. You don't have to hang out with your wife that much if you don't want to.
Especially not when your career is being a military man.
Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong about this. I read this, like, while I was researching for this podcast. At no fault of Jane Austen's, who could not see the future, the regiment we're told that he was enlisted in by Darcy, whatever the promotion situation is actually called, did actually almost all get massacred like 3 or 4 years after the book came out. That's
Probably
not really Jane Austen's fault.
Not Jane Austen's fault.
So
also,
he actually probably died about 2 years after all this.
But I do feel if you are an officer in the British Army, in the Napoleonic Wars...
You can be banging French sex workers left, right and centre. You do not have to hang out with Lydia.
Right, exactly. I feel like you can pretty much move to France.
Yeah.
Like, even when the war is over, you don't have to come home. You can just stay in France and be technically married.
Yeah.
No one will stop you doing this.
You can still flirt with the local girls if you're technically married.
Especially if you're technically married, but not at home. So your wife is not in the room watching you flirt.
The thing is, like, the punishment for Wickham is being married to Lydia, but it doesn't...
That bad.
I mean, aside from Lydia is not that bad, she's just 15. Also, he's off being a militiaman. He's not at home.
Right, being married, it's not that bad. It doesn't cramp your style all that much.
I think also, like, it does sort of reflect kind of sadly on Darcy, who, I mean, I mentioned this as a funny thing when we were talking about future dinner parties, but it is actually kind of sad that Georgiana and Darcy have to hang out with this guy for, like, the rest of their natural lives, because he's their brother-in-law now.
Yeah.
That sucks.
It really is better for everyone the more time he stays in France.
Yeah, like, I would not want to have dinner once a week with the guy who tried to abduct me or my sister and steal all of our inheritance. Not literally abduct, but you know what I mean.
You think you'd have some lingering bad feelings?
I would be uncomfortable asking him to pass the salt.
Yeah, I can see that. I think you're not unreasonable there.
Honestly, like, with that in context, he has moved a bit of a mountain for Lizzie there. I do feel like it puts Lizzie into a position of, like, actually you would be a dick if you didn't marry him now.
On the other hand, you would, if you didn't marry him, he would... If you don't marry him, then Wickham will not be his brother-in-law, so he won't have to have him to dinner all the time.
Exactly, it's a weird situation. Like I'm saying, the Wickham thing just bugs me.
Yeah, it brings us back to why is this missing stair being maintained?
Yeah.
Why is nobody just having a quiet word? Because they all visit each other all the time. It's not like the only way they can gossip is at the big balls. They are on a constant round of visiting each other for tea.
There was nothing else to do.
Why, in this endless round of visiting people to take tea and gossip, did you not mention the whole Wickham history and situation and warn the local daughters?
It feels to me like a tarnish on the characters of Bingley and Darcy. And to be fair, Bingley and Darcy don't appear to know that Wickham is there until he's brought up to them. It's not like they're keeping tabs on his whereabouts.
No, they're not stalking.
But the fact that, like, nobody both has heard this story and passes it on to the Bennet sisters just niggles a little bit, because everything comes out so well for Wickham.
He does get away with basically all of it.
I mean, the upside is he doesn't seem to realise this because he's described as extremely miserable having to be near Lydia.
I think he's miserable about being caught, though. I think he's miserable about his
I
his
think in
scheme
4 to
not
5
working out.
months. I think in 4 or 5 months he'll realise that this has worked out great for him. I think right now he's upset because he got caught and now he's been trapped in marriage to slightly annoying Lydia.
Right, he's upset because his scheme didn't work out, and he had to face some consequences that were when you think about it, actually, the consequences not that bad.
You've got married to someone who is your equal or superior, you've got income, you've got a rich relative who will bail you out. You have won, Wickham.
Right. And if you don't like hanging out with your wife, you don't have to. It's the Regency.
Yeah.
You can take an apartment in town and literally never see her again.
My understanding is that's what most people did.
I don't think it was uncommon, especially for people who, for whatever reason, did not like their wives.
Yes. Yeah. Also, things that niggle me, number 2, and this is sort of a caveat to there are loads of women around.
Uh-huh.
This isn't a, you read this and think Jane Austen just didn't like other women scenario, but I find it impossible to understand what is going through the minds of all of these social superior women to Lizzie. So Catherine de Bourgh, Bingley's sisters, everyone except Georgiana Darcy are just so unnecessarily rude all the time that it becomes funny.
Right, I mean, Catherine de Bourgh is a hilarious character.
She is so funny, I adore her.
Comic presence in the book, she's amazing. As a person, what is up with her?
What is going on with these people? I mean, Bingley's sisters you sort of understand because Bingley is a doormat and it is his job to control his sisters.
Bingley is a doormat and one of his sisters is pursuing Darcy, not with any success, but
No.
that's part of her. Her motivation of she is trying to marry Darcy makes sense.
Yeah. Also, Darcy doesn't appear to have noticed, and Bingley, whose job it is to corral his sisters, has the spine of a raspberry blancmange.
Yes.
So it sort of makes sense. It just feels tonally weird in a way that I struggle to put my finger on, that in this sort of marriage market comedy of romances, 90% of, the problems that the Bennet's elder sisters face are caused by other women sabotaging them for basically no reason.
Yes. Yeah, Lydia's problems are caused by Wickham, but Jane's problems are caused by Bingley's sisters.
Don't they stand to gain anything from it?
No, because they would prefer that Bingley married Darcy's sister. But
or cousin, yes.
Sister or cousin, he's got one of each, and I think that
yeah.
They would like Mr. Bingley to marry one or other of them, but that's they don't really have anything to lose if he doesn't, because there's no inheritance problem there. He's going to inherit regardless of who he marries because he's a man.
Yeah.
So their future does not depend on whether he marries Darcy's sister. Like his friendship with Darcy seems pretty solid and long-standing, and
he is of a slightly higher level of gentry than Bingley. It makes sense that they'd want to climb that particular pole. It just doesn't quite make sense why they have such an aversion to Jane being part of this situation.
Right, exactly, because who Bingley marries does not stop them pursuing Darcy.
The only thing to object to about Jane is her unbearable family. And that's
Darcy doesn't seem to be that reason.
Yeah, Darcy is the one who goes, don't marry her. She hasn't really given you any indication that she's that into you, and her mother is a social climber. So, in the balance of probability, she's just being shoved at you to climb the social, fireman's pole.
Right, you'd have to spend time with the Bennets, and do you really want to have the Bennets as your family-in-law?
Also, while Darcy is a dick, it's not an unreasonable supposition for him to make that Jane is a bit shy. She hasn't been super effusive about her fondness for Bingley. Given that all Darcy knows about her is her social climbing mother, it's not unreasonable for him to say, don't marry her just because she's pretty and nice. If she's using you for your money, don't marry her. And we don't know she isn't, so the safest thing to do would be not marry her. It's not nice, but it does make sense.
Right.
Bingley's sisters appear to just go, ew, don't like her.
Right. I think it makes some sense if you look at it as they have a plan for how the future is going to go.
Mm.
And it's a plan that doesn't include Jane. They have already done the fantasy marriage market and worked out who's marrying who, and Jane is not in that picture.
It's a weird thing because it feels to me like it should be a class satire, but it then simply doesn't land. Like Bingley
Yeah,
sisters and Catherine de Bourgh feel like they should be a condemnation of the upper classes, but then they're just not. Lizzie just says, well, I've heard your opinions and they are garbage, so farewell. We're going to marry them.
right.
There's no triumph of the not even lower middle classes over the upper classes and upper middle classes. It's just, okay, I have heard your opinions. They are dog shit. Bingley's marrying Jane, Darcy's marrying me, get lost. And then they do.
Right. Thank you for your opinion. But as you have no actual power in this situation and I wish to marry him, this has merely fueled my determination to annoy you.
Yeah, it's weird because it does just feel slightly out of place in a novel which fairly expressly tells us it's about the flaws of the marriage market and the situation women are in Regency era, like, manners.
Yeah.
It feels weird that a significant portion of the story's, like, little mini tragedies are caused by random women in positions of mild power choosing to screw over other women.
Right. There is a certain amount of you can't trust women because, well, yeah, you just there's no solidarity here.
Yeah.
They
And it
will
just,
screw you over because they can.
it's not actually a problem. It's like the Wickham thing. There's nothing wrong with it. It just feels weird.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah, it
choice
feels
I
like it
can't
sort of muddies the message a bit.
Exactly, yeah. It just feels like there should have been some reason that this happened, and there just isn't.
Yeah.
It would have made like more sense to me if Bingley's sisters had like just straight up been like, her family are unbearable, we're not living with them, Bingley, back to London, now.
Right. Rather than just ill country girls.
Yeah. I think also part of this is modern looking back, because I think some of the ew country girls would have been just obvious and not needed to be stated at the time. Whereas
Yeah.
now, we're just like, you all appear to be vaguely posh.
But you're all the same class, and they're like, "Excuse me, she's a country girl. She's
We
not
came
even
out in
gentry.
London.
How are we the same class?"
Yeah. Um,
She
but, you
has
know,
relatives in trade.
yeah. Sorry,
Which
just
just there,
enjoy.
there, there is a wonderful line where the relative who is in trade, Mrs. Bennet's brother, comes to visit, and the narrative voice, which is vaguely Lizzie, but this is not really a closely held point of view book. Sometimes we get glimpses into other people's minds, and the narrative voice is not Lizzie herself. She's not the one writing this story. He comes up for a week or so with Mrs. Bennet's sister, and there's the narrator has a line about how it was very surprising how courteous and how good his manners were for somebody who not only was in trade but lived within sight of his warehouses. And it's like, oh, there's a class thing happening there, isn't there? We are supposed to understand that that he does not belong in these drawing rooms, and therefore it's to his credit that he makes it seem as if he does, because he actually runs a business for a living, not even works for a living. He's a CEO for a living instead of just having money.
Exactly, yeah. It's just a bit weird. There's a lot going on class-wise that, like, I think modern readers are less well-equipped to understand. Non-British readers, good luck to you. I feel
cannot
so
imagine.
sorry for
Right,
everyone who read this at school in, like, the States or other parts of the world that aren't English-speaking, especially.
Yeah, I cannot imagine trying to understand this book without a thorough and fundamental grounding in the social norms.
Like, so much of it is about, like, things happening in Bath! Exclamation mark, and you're supposed to know what that means. And you're just like where the museum is?
Right.
I cannot imagine what this is like to read at school if you, like, are doing English literature in, like, Canada or Australia or the States, or worse, if you are reading this, like, as a second language English speaker, just going, what is this?
Right, and so much of what you need to understand is being given to you by little linguistic nods to the scenario. Who gets what kind of title? Who is described by their surname and who is described by their first name?
Yeah. And,
You're
like,
being given information that way, but if you don't understand the information you're being given, it's just, why do these people have more than one name?
yeah, it's like in oh god, is it You're Wrong About? It's one of that family of podcasts. They did the Lady Diana story, and there's a whole, like, I don't understand why the Earl Spencer is fancier than the Earl of Spencer. And I was like, don't worry. Nobody does, buddy. The rules
you
don't make sense, they just are.
right.
Sorry, you've come in here thinking that the rules like were picked out by someone to make sense and be coherent.
Right.
No,
You
they
are
just
asking.
happened.
You think that this is a set of rules that was worked out as a set? No, absolutely not. This is 1500 years of evolution with no particular direction.
Yeah.
This just is. It just exists.
It doesn't make sense to anyone, it just is. Sorry.
Black Rod is still wearing the outfit.
We like to get our use out of things, you know?
Right. So yes, if we talk about Miss Bennet, we mean Jane. If we talk about Miss Elizabeth Bennet, that means we know she's not the eldest unmarried Bennet.
Yes. You're only Miss Bennet if you are the eldest unmarried Bennet in the room.
Right. Crucially, this is different from being the eldest Bennet.
Yes.
Like, there are... But these are things that the book does not spell out for you, because the book, although you can kind of now read it like science fiction, gives you a world that you're not familiar with and lets you pick out how it works from the story. It wasn't written to be that. So there is no little glossary to explain to you how the names work.
That's what SparkNotes is for.
Go read The Goblin Emperor, and it will have a little passage in the beginning that's like, here is how surnames work. They have different endings depending on sex and marital status. Pride and Prejudice will not do this for you.
The funny part of this for me is if when you're studying this in the UK at school, you can like buy a revision guide, like you can get the CGP book about Pride and Prejudice or whatever. But if you go online, all of it is geared to helping Americans understand British culture.
So it explains things like what a carriage is.
Yeah, and you're like, no, I'm with you on that. Could you just give me the time capsule version?
Right. I do know where Bath is, and
there's no differentiation between the confusions of the English and the confusions of the Regency. Which just makes those revision guides very funny to read as a British person.
Yeah.
They're just like explaining what an earl is, and I'm like, no, I know what an earl is. I've met earls. Just tell me what was the significance of like this type of pony ride over.
Right. Explain to me the phaeton versus the regular carriage. What's the implication of that?
Exactly. Yes, so that's sort of I'm only going to do 2, really. There are other little ones in the category of things that aren't really problems, they're just weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that there's a sort of near double wedding near the end. Not quite, but yeah. I can't remember but like the sort of 2 of them are paired off at the end.
Lizzie and Jane both get married, if not actually at the same time, then very, very close.
Yeah. I think in a couple of the adaptations they've had double weddings, which is cute, but not a thing I'm aware of being popular in Regency England.
Yeah.
But it makes for a better sort of final scene, so whatever.
It's much easier to tie the little bow around it if they just do it together.
Yeah. I do think it's a bit weird that no one appears to find out what the plot of the novel was by the end.
Nobody ever gets. Mr. Poirot does not explain to everyone what has just happened.
Like, especially in terms of like Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, like it doesn't appear that anyone ever explains. Because at the end, when Lizzie goes to her father and says, "I think I'm going to marry Darcy after all," he kind of goes, "Wait, what? You hate him?"
When did this happen? I think no one ever really explains to him the money thing either.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of money goes into getting the Wickham marriage.
Yeah, Mr. Bennet appears to come back slightly, almost concussed with shock. Just like, yeah, everything just worked out fine. I barely did anything. And they're like, we know you barely did anything, Dad.
We didn't expect you to take actions. Honestly, we were surprised you went.
Yeah. But like, it's just, again, it's one of the things, it's not really a problem with the story because the protagonists know all of this, but it's really unclear to me who knows what by the time that Jane and Lizzie get married.
Yeah. Everything has sort of worked out. Is anyone aware that it has worked out?
Yeah, like, do they know everything is fine?
It would be very funny if they didn't.
Yeah.
They find out 3 years down the line that they've been worrying over something that is solved.
Like, especially in terms of, like, if you viewed this from the Bennet parent perspective, the story is about Jane's tribulations in her courtship with the eligible Mr. Bingley, and then in comes Mr. Darcy with the steel chair.
Right. And Lizzie upstages her sister by getting married at the same time to somebody better.
Yes.
It's like, well, that's a very Lizzie thing to do, but Jane won't mind.
Jane won't mind because Jane is perfect, and because they don't know this, because Lizzie's suitor is the reason that Jane's problems went away. He is also the reason they started, but still.
Right. But there's very much the threads aren't dangling, but has anyone been told that things are fine.
It just feels like
what does Mary know about her sisters right now?
Do Mary and Kitty have any idea what is going on? Does anyone ever explain to Lydia what is going on? Because she was there and she still doesn't know.
I have to assume that at some point in the future, somebody explains to Lydia how her marriage was arranged.
I don't
and why
think
she should maybe be a little bit nicer to Mr. Darcy about it. I assume that would be the context in which someone told her. By someone, I mean at some point Lizzie would be like, Lydia, you need to be nicer to my husband because he is the reason that you've got one.
I don't think Lydia would listen if it was Lizzie. I think after one of the aforementioned awkward dinner parties, Wickham just caves and goes, okay, I'd never wanted to have any conversation with you ever, especially not this one, but I think if you keep antagonising Mr. Darcy, he will kill me.
And I mean that very literally, with a sword.
Yeah, he's tried before, you know?
Please
didn't go through with it, but came close.
Needling Mr. Darcy, who is the only reason that you are here, and also have nice clothes, and also he will kill me.
Yes.
He will kill me dead.
Do you prefer to have an alive husband?
And Lydia will be like, I mean, sometimes.
If so, please stop bragging that you were the first of your sisters to be married.
Because it's a sensitive subject, and he will shoot me with a gun.
Yep. I'm just saying. I don't think anyone has told Lydia anything. Or if they did, she wasn't listening.
Right. I don't think Lydia knows anything. She may have been told. We can't rule it out.
It's sort of the same energy as, like, it's not that Bingley doesn't know anything. I think Bingley has actively chosen to forget the events of this novel. He's just like, well, that all worked out and I'm married to my true love, Jane.
Right, in a couple of years, Bingley is like, yes, there was some unhappiness around your sister's marriage, wasn't there? Anyway, I'm going for a nice walk around my lovely garden.
Yeah, like, someone asks him how he met his wife, and he's like, it's actually the funniest story. My best mate Darcy here told me not to marry her because she was, like, poor and embarrassing, and then he said the same thing to his wife, and then we fucked off to London, and now we're all married. And then he walks away, leaving somebody there like, wait, what?
Was that the whole story? I feel like there were some steps missing. Did that work? That's a very strange way of proposing.
That is a bold move. And Lizzie is just watching this like, yeah, I thought the same.
Right, bold was the thought I had in mind, absolutely. Okay, we've been going a little while.
This brings us to my final stage, which is things that are genuinely bad faith takes, but I totally understand why people have them. Which are
please share with me the bad faith takes. I'm excited for the bad faith takes.
I did go looking for some
honestly, this whole episode, we have been in more good faith than I was anticipating.
Yeah, I thought I'd save bad faith until the end. It seemed fairer.
Okay.
Number 1, Darcy, unbearable.
Oh, he's awful.
To which I hear you all say, bestie, that's the plot. But it's awful.
Right. Not only is it the plot, he's also awful in ways that I recognise as me.
Yeah.
I also am brooding in the corner of a party going, none of them are even that pretty, everyone calm down.
He literally says in front of Jane, when he knows she can hear him, that he won't dance with her because she's too ugly. A week later, he insults her sister. Another week later, he says, your family are embarrassing and poor, but I want to marry you anyway, so there.
And she says, no, and he's like, but why?
Exactly.
What have I said that would make you not want to marry me? And she's like, everything about you makes me not want to marry you.
Honestly, like, everything about that makes me go, he could have single-handedly, like, saved my entire family from a dragon, and I would still not marry that man. Are you fucking kidding me?
We've heard your pitch, and it sucks.
Like, I have no proof that you are not still the same unbearable human being you were. Yes, you've done several nice things. I'm sure you've done many nice things in your life. You're still rude.
Your house is not nice enough to make up for having to live with you in it.
Like, I cannot buy that in their marriage she has never, like, genuinely tried to smother him with a pillow.
Now that's a kick-off to a soap opera.
It just all boils over. He makes one too many snippy comments about her younger sisters, and she goes, nope, death it is.
Do you know what? Being the widow Mrs. Darcy wouldn't be that bad.
Yeah. Like, I think about once a week, he says something humiliatingly rude to one of her friends, and she announces that she will be a widow within the fortnight.
Right. And honestly, her friends would be like, we get it.
Now, I must say, the good faith rejoinder to this is I do totally understand a Regency era woman going, the sexiest thing I can imagine is someone listening to my opinion of them and taking it on board.
Right. I got a sincere apology, and he actually changed his behaviour. His behaviour changed, visibly changed.
Yeah. So as I said, I do think it's bad faith to say Darcy is unbearable, because like that is the plot.
That is the plot.
I do
but also
understand why people read this book and go, why the fuck would you marry him? It doesn't matter what he does next. Why would you marry that man? He's intolerable.
Well, he also does own Chatsworth, though.
I know, that's the thing. Is like I could
put up with a lot to own Chatsworth.
Honestly, I would have married him the first time.
Probably same. Yeah.
But like, I do understand the people who are like, wait, he's awful. Why does she marry him no matter what he did after that?
They're not
Those
wrong.
people have my sympathy.
They are, less swayed by wealth and comfort than I am.
They probably haven't been to Chatsworth.
They probably haven't been to Chatsworth, which really will... I do appreciate the 1995 version has them going around the house, and you can see Lizzie reconsidering, where she's like, it is a really nice house. Like could I put up with Darcy to live in this house? Maybe.
This leads us to bad faith nitpick number 2. Lizzie is a shallow bitch. Oh my god, she's like, look, you suck, but you have proven yourself helpful and rich, so...
I mean, I can't... I'm too aware of the limitations of her situation to judge her for that.
Yeah, I can't judge her, but I do think I understand why other modern readers can judge her.
Right, I think it is a fair reading of the character to be like, so you had all of these high-minded principles about him being not, like, nice enough for you, and then you saw his house and he, like, paid off your sister's kidnapper, and now suddenly you're chill.
Like, again, in good faith, I will say, I actually think it makes perfect sense to see that the guy you turned down because he was rude is actually, like, really responsible and sensible and, like, good at looking out for those weaker than him, and go, actually, maybe you're not a douche. That does make sense to me. But I don't think, like, I think a lot of people read it as entirely that, and I am a little bit like, I can't imagine that the house didn't help.
I think you're supposed to understand that it did. That's the reason why the house is in the story. Like, there's no reason that she has to go on that little tour of
well, no, because the little tour of the house, I think within the text, that tour of the house is supposed to show, A, that he, like, is a responsible landowner. Like, it actually talks about his responsible land practices and how his servants are well fed and stuff. It shows that he's not a shameless cad. He is actually being responsible and sensible, which are all excellent qualities in a husband.
Yes, and there's also that meeting with, like, his old nurse who's like, no, he's just shy. He's always been shy in company. When he's at home, he's very warm and nice.
I sort of put the house in the same bracket as Georgiana, where it's like, oh, this is a guy who will look after you. Which sort of, one of the main issues with it's not the only reason not to marry a dickhead, but one of the main issues is that you will be miserable. Whereas if he's a dickhead who looks after his things, you'll probably be fine. And I do think that is the line that the house tour is drawing.
Yes, I think that's true. Also, there's some of it that it's like, because we are in Regency England, you wouldn't necessarily be living here with him.
Yes.
You would be living here with Georgiana and his pottery collection and this lovely art on the walls and nice sunrooms. And sometimes he would visit.
If you are going to be the property of a man, it is actually a reasonable concern to want that man to take good care of his property.
Right, and you can go round Pemberley. Is it Pemberley? Yeah, Pemberley. Yeah. And go, actually, I would live in comfort.
Yeah.
He's not just a man who can keep me in comfort, he's a man who will keep me in comfort.
Which is an important distinction, especially because, yes, he is actually rude to her, but rude to her isn't her primary issue. Her primary issue is bad person. Like, she sees him being rude as an extension of his character. This is evidence that he is a good person who is rude, which is a lot more forgivable.
Right. She need not have any concern that if she marries him, she will be the one who is relegated to a cheap apartment.
I do, however, think that it comes across as Lizzie being shallow.
It's a little bit gold digger. It is a little bit gold digger. You see his lovely house. I like that the 95 version, like, acknowledges this, which is like, well, I thought I changed my mind when I saw his lovely house.
Yeah. I'm just like, yeah, fair.
It was a feature in my decision making.
part 2 of Lizzie is a shallow bitch. Lizzie is such a bitch. I
She's
like
so-
her, but she's so mean to anyone who
so
isn't
mean.
Jane.
Right. She has as an article of faith, Jane is perfect. Even when Jane is exhibiting behaviours that she would mock in literally anyone else.
Yeah. Like, we do see that she has a blind spot for Jane, and to a lesser extent for her father. Like, she's a bit
Right, she does
judgy of her dad.
acknowledge that he's not really very great at being responsible, but she loves him anyway.
Yeah.
But she kind of knows that's what she's doing, whereas she's like, no, Jane is perfect, how dare you?
Everyone else. Lizzie is so mean.
She's so judgy about Charlotte.
Yeah.
Charlotte makes a good employment decision. She's so mean.
Like, Lydia is her youngest baby sister. The fact that Lizzie's reaction to her eloping, being ruined, potentially, like, being in actual danger is, oh, that fucking idiot, is, like, understandable, but still mean.
Again, sibling behaviour, but come on, Lizzie.
See. Keep that on the inside.
What were you saying about Mr. Darcy being rude?
Yeah, it's just like, you fucking hypocrite, Lizzie. Further nitpicks. Again, still in the bad faith school of nitpicking.
Uh-huh.
None of the inheritance situation isn't explained in a way that is helpful. I understand this is because I'm a modern reader, but it takes like 4 read-throughs to understand the situation the girls are in.
Entailing is not a thing we do anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I assume that rich weirdos do, but I'm not in that class of people.
Not the fault of the novel, but this has so many people who are in different social classes and different types of inheritances and different existing marriage agreements and things like that, that it's just throwing so much information at you at the beginning of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, read as a sci-fi novel, it is short on actual explanation and big on, figure it out.
It just assumes you both know and care a lot about how estates are inherited, and I actually think even in the Regency period that was an assumption.
Yes, I think she was of the sort of shabby nobility herself, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And she was writing for her own class of people and not explaining things that were obvious to her. I don't think she was giving a lot of thought to what was obvious to anyone else.
Yeah, I don't think this is exclusively a modern reader. I think this is a reader who did not personally know Jane Austen problem. Like, everyone she expected to read this, she had probably met at a ball once.
Right, she's writing for her own reading group.
Yeah, and it shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if some of the more caricature characters are recognisable. You in fact knew her in her social circle. I wonder who Mrs. Bennet is.
This does bring me on to number 4, which is sort of this is a nice full circle moment. A lot of these characters are in crayon. We mentioned at the beginning that some of them make sense. Some of them, it doesn't matter that much that they're in crayon. Mm-hmm. And then one of them is Bingley.
Bingley is written in crayon in much the same way as Jane is. They are the perfect couple of perfect people.
They are the perfect couple of perfect people, and I understand this. But it's so hard to believe that Bingley is a human person that exists.
He is.
I'm sorry, so you're telling me you've met the love of your life, the most beautiful woman in England, apparently. She's lovely, she's sweet. The worst thing you can say about her is that her mum is embarrassing. Like,
and you wouldn't even have to spend time with her.
Think for a second about how perfect someone would have to be for your only gripe with them to be that their mum is pushy.
Right. What do you do about this? Literally nothing.
And your bestie says, hey, we don't know anything about her. She could be a gold digger like her mum. You should sod off to London. And you do?
Right, and you're like, yeah, that seems like a good plan.
The goddamn hell is going through his brain? Is it just candy floss?
Yes. He has a brain full of dryer lint.
I'm supposed to believe he's impossibly nice. And I'm like, no, he's not impossibly nice. He's impossibly waffly. If he was nice,
a bit wet.
He would have asked the Bennets. Like, it's actually not a nice thing to do to, like, not jilt someone. They don't have an agreement, but it was clear to everyone that they were courting. Just sod off without a word. That's not a kind thing to do to a woman who thought you might marry her.
He is, in fact, wet.
So wet. And don't get me wrong, my impression is that these sort of slightly foppish wet men were everywhere in Regency era Britain. All of the ones who weren't like that were at war. But it's still very, very frustrating to read, and it just doesn't seem like a human person. Like, it doesn't seem like behaviour a human being would do.
I don't know, I've met some pretty wet people.
I think for me is that we're sort of informed that he's basically perfect. He's the ideal match for Jane. And I'm like, yeah, except for how he broke her heart for no reason on the say-so of someone who's known her exactly as long as he has.
Right.
Like, I actually think that's a dick move.
I do think being that much of a pushover that you just agree with the opinion of whoever last spoke to you is a flaw.
Yeah. And we're sort of supposed to assume that that's fine now because Darcy's changed his mind so Bingley and Jane can get married. And I'm a bit like, it's not Darcy's fucking decision.
Right, the fact that you are still only doing this because Darcy says it's okay now is the problem.
Yeah.
That is the problem with you.
And this brings me to my final nitpick, and this is the last one. We've been going for like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody, apart from our main characters, and this is like, I mean that literally, nobody learns or changes.
It's true.
In the entire book.
Mr. Bennet starts the story in his library not thinking about his daughters, and he finishes the story in his library not thinking about his daughters.
Jane starts the story perfect, she ends the story perfect. Bingley starts the story wet, he ends the story wet. Lydia starts the story silly and annoying, Lydia ends the story silly and annoying.
She's silly and annoying and married, but she has not changed as a person at all. And honestly, neither has Lizzie, because Lizzie's role is to have the right opinions at all times. Darcy is in fact the only one who's changed.
No, Lizzie does learn that her first opinion of Darcy was incorrect and her first opinion of Wickham was incorrect. I think Lizzie does learn a lesson about first opinions. It was the novel was originally called First Impressions, and I think that is what Lizzie learns, genuinely, that she misjudged these people. The problem is that it doesn't matter because she's now married, so she doesn't have to make first impressions of marriageable men anymore.
Right. The problem, in fact, has been solved not by her learning to make better judgment calls, but by her not needing to make judgment calls.
Lizzie has learned a lesson that is no longer material to her.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Darcy has learned to be nice to his in-laws.
Darcy has learned to be slightly less of a dick, and that's the most character development anybody gets.
Again, soap opera.
Yeah.
Nobody changes in a soap opera because we have to run forever.
And I just think that's, to be honest, the only thing I would pick out of all of this list of things that niggled me and like weird nitpicks that I have. And I didn't go into the little like, oh, this says this, but this says this ones, because frankly, it's boring to listen to. Uh-huh. But that is the only one that I would like, hands down, cards on the table, say is actually kind of a flaw, is nothing is learnt here.
Nobody improves.
Nobody improves.
Or even gets worse.
Nobody improves, nobody gets worse, and in 20 years' time, their kids will make the exact same mistakes.
Right, which I think is the tragedy of the thing, is that the Bennet generation to come will have exactly the same flaws and exactly the same problems.
Yeah, and that's
will
why
make the same bad decisions.
300 years later? Well, no, more like... Okay, whatever.
When was it published?
It was 1813. So 200 years later. Years. Yeah. That's why 200 years later, we still have an aristocracy making exactly the same stupid mistakes.
Honestly.
Surprise, we managed to make this an anti-aristocracy podcast again.
Listener, if you thought we were going to be pro the aristocracy because we read a fun romance novel, you did not give us enough credit.
None of these people learn from any of their mistakes because
they don't have to because they have enough money that there are no actual consequences.
There are no consequences to any of their actions because all of the problems they cause for themselves are solved by someone with more money solving them or their own money solving them. It's right. That simple.
And they move in the circles where there is infinity money.
There is infinity money. Like, this is what I'm sort of getting at with not the war not mattering. People are dying.
But you wouldn't know it from this book.
Were bad. They weren't one of those fun wars, that definitely
they were long and they were drawn out, and we invented guns which made everything worse, and chunks of them took place on forced marches into and out of Russia, which makes everything worse. And we'd invented long distance sailing, but we had not yet invented vitamin C, which makes everything worse. Like so much of the material circumstance around the Napoleonic Wars just made them worse.
Yeah, we were also in the process of inventing nationalism, which definitely only brought good things to the world.
Right, there was a lot of colonialism happening at the same time as the Napoleonic Wars, which made both the wars and the colonialism worse.
Like, it's impossible to read this as a modern reader and not see the way that these people's problems mean nothing to the world around them and fundamentally mean nothing to them, in the way it ends happily with no one having learned or changed and all of the matches being rearranged to the way they should have been.
Yes, everyone marries the person who you can kind of pick up at the start of the book. Like, the only surprise is Wickham.
The only surprise is Wickham, and the only development is Darcy is less of a douche canoe.
Yeah. But fundamentally, they meet Darcy and Bingley at the ball at the start of the book. And one of the things Darcy does have to say is, well, that's the only pretty one, meaning Lizzie.
Sure, that's
Then
Jane,
he marries
actually.
Lizzie.
No, he calls Lizzie ugly, doesn't he?
I think he might call Jane pretty.
Yeah, he calls Jane pretty, and he says that Lizzie isn't handsome enough to go dancing with.
Yeah.
And
Although
Lizzie...
he's changed his mind by the second time he meets Lizzie. He's like, actually, she does have nice eyes.
Yeah. But, like, this is the thing, this is the, again, I think, genuinely a flaw, and a flaw that Jane Austen probably couldn't have fixed, because Jane Austen was not in a position to understand the flaws of her own society, because she was one of them.
Yeah, she was one of these people. She wrote The World She Knew.
This is a story about the two richest men at the party marrying the two prettiest women at the party, and that's it. It's just about the hijinks that get in their way along the route. It's never about the train being derailed.
No. We are always going to the place that we started. Like, the destination was written on the front of the train, and that's where we went.
Yeah.
We went through some scenery on the way.
Honestly, I think that kind of sucks.
So we've gone from shallow nitpicking to, like, serious moral flaws.
Yes. And that was in the bad faith section. Because I do actually think it's a completely unreasonable demand to have of Jane Austen that she take on all of classism.
Who was writing a surprisingly cutting novel about how the marriage market failed women.
Yeah. I think it's a completely unreasonable demand for me to make of Jane Austen.
That she also solves Napoleonic Wars and aristocracy.
Yeah. I freely admit, this is a bad faith criticism, but it's fucking right.
It's still true. You can be true and also a dick. See also Mr. Darcy.
And that's...
Because nothing Darcy says about the family is incorrect in any way.
And that's why I am actually fundamentally right in the end, because this is what we're told about Mr. Darcy.
Okay, shall we wrap up?
Yes. Let's rattle some die.
Are we putting this one back in the hat?
I think we should, because I had a good time, but I don't know if we need to. I think we could put another classic novel in. Might be nice.
I think we should put a different classic novel in.
Yeah. I think originally this category was Austen, but I'm going to expand it to classic novels in general and have a little think about it.
Yeah, have a think. Maybe you can make me read a novel that, what are those canonical novels that everyone is supposed to have read?
I actually haven't read most of those. My literary knowledge ends pretty abruptly in the sort of 14th century.
Yeah.
And
it's all a bit post your field, isn't it?
Yeah, the canonical novels, I tend to have a vague idea of what happens in them because I was hanging around with English students, but I haven't actually read most of them.
On the level of class stuff and also surprisingly funny, let's put one of the Lord Peter Wimsey novels in there.
Oh, I could go for that, yes. Do you have a preference?
Not a strong one.
I'll have a think about it then.
Yeah, have a think. But I think, once again, a media property I'm aware of primarily through the BBC radio adaptations, which were very good. But there's some fascinating stuff about all the stuff that he gets up to and gets away with because he is aristocracy.
Yes. That or maybe a Jeeves situation.
Or maybe a Jeeves situation, yeah. Let's do classic novels brackets class. Okay, shall we roll some dice? I'm going to pull up a dice roller because it is my turn. How many schools have we got now?
Oh yeah, we are on a 7-sided die.
7?
We're on to the numbers of sides that people might conceivably have.
There is no 7-sided dice.
No, we're getting close. We're about to hit 6.
There is a 6. Everyone's got a 6-sided dice. We are getting there. All right. 7.
Redemptive.
Interesting. So that is, we're saying, sort of starting from the position that there's something wrong with this and we need to understand it as something better than it seems to be on its face.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, 101. Let's go. 13.
Lord of the Rings.
Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Oh, wow.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to argue the case. Lord of the Rings is good.
What if the Lord of the Rings was good? Okay. I think this is surprisingly challenging. I'm up for it.
Yeah, this sounds fun.
Lord of the Rings, actually, it's good. Tune in next week to find out how I'm going to make that difficult argument. Thank you, Dice
This is going to be
Gods.
great fun. I'm so glad you rolled that.
That's amazing.
It's going to be great.
Listener, I'll see you then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Analysis Roulette, a podcast applying a randomly selected mode of analysis to a randomly selected creative work, just to see what happens. Your hosts have been Dia and Duck. You can find us on Spotify or on YouTube, and if you'd like to get in touch, you can send us an email at analysisroulette@gmail.com. And remember, if you like our show, share it with your friends, and if you don't like our show, share it with your enemies. Thanks.